Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. What has the United Nations done over the past 15 years to mobilize the world to eradicate poverty, to promote sustainable development, and to empower women? We'll be back in just a moment to talk about these and other important issues. Welcome back to our program. Today we're going to take a look at efforts by the United Nations to mobilize the world to deal with some major problems. My guest today is someone who's very knowledgeable of what the UN and other groups have been doing. My guest today is Mr. Thomas Gass. Mr. Thomas Gass is the Assistant Secretary General for Policy Coordination and Interagency Affairs in the United Nations Department for Economic and Social Affairs. Mr. Gass has extensive experience in the development cooperation both in the field and in headquarters, in bilateral and in multilateral agencies. Before joining the United Nations, he both established the Swiss mission in Nepal and he served as the ambassador, which also included the responsibility for a 20 to 30 million major development program. Assistant Secretary General Gass, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. It's a great pleasure to be here.
I appreciate you being with me today. Let's start at the top and just very briefly, what is the Department for Economic and Social Affairs? The name may say it all, but there's a little more to it than that, I'm sure.
Well, it's an administrative term. So it's basically the arm of the Secretariat of the United Nations that deals with development, economic and social issues. So the entity within the Secretariat that services the intergovernmental process, the process by which the member states agree on policies, agree on common values, agree on operations that they want to do in the economic, social, environmental areas. But also the entity that provides analytic documents and reports for these negotiations, and to a lesser extent, also an entity that provides support for capacity building within countries, within the administrations, the governments of countries.
Mm-hmm. Now, back in 2000, the United Nations brought together the countries of the world, most of the members of the UN General Assembly, to focus on the UN Millennium Development Goals, 8 goals, just to lay the groundwork for what we're going to talk about for this new development agenda. What were a few of these goals, and what was the purpose of bringing these countries and later other groups in to deal with these major issues?
The Millennium Development Goals were really developed on the heel of the Millennium Declaration. If you remember, that was the big outcome of the Millennium Summit here in New York. And after the summit, after this declaration, a number of experts came together and developed this set of 8 goals that basically aimed at reducing poverty, halving poverty in the world, looking at certain goals, looking at how to deal with the environment, with education, with mortality of women and children, empowerment of women, etc. So a number of goals that in some would halve poverty in the world.
Mm-hmm. Now that started out as a intergovernmental activity, I guess, with the member states, the governments represented at the United Nations, basically all the countries of the world at the United Nations at that time. But how important was that as far as bringing in other groups, service clubs like Rotary International, Kiwanis, different groups like that, faith-based organizations, the rest of the whole United Nations system, all of the UN agencies, the private sector, CEOs, to focus attention on these problems and to galvanize their efforts and resources to work to help overcome these problems?
I think they were very effective. it just took a long time. I mean, I would say that it took us close to 5 years to really mobilize the development community, be it the public or the private, the civil society, behind the implementation of these Millennium Development Goals at that time. But they were very effective, and today they are quite well known. On the whole, there has been a great degree of achievement, if of course with some exceptions, especially a lot of inequality in terms of the implementation and the achievement of these goals.
Mm-hmm. And that was over a 15-year time span, 2000 to 2015. We're about to see maybe the expiration of those goals, but there is a new development agenda at the United Nations. What will we see January, or we see it before then, but January 1st, what will be implemented to build upon the successes of accomplishing those previous goals?
Well, as you said, I think we're very much at a watershed moment in terms of this development cooperation and also the way development is seen. Hopefully, if everything goes well this year, we will have in September a summit at which a vision for development, a vision for how humanity should develop within the next 15 years should be adopted with a set of goals and targets to go forward. These would build very strongly on the Millennium Development Goals, would finish this unfinished business of the Millennium Development Goals, but move much further.
Mm-hmm. Now, as I understand it, there will probably be 17 new goals with 169 targets. Quantitatively, I can see some differences between the others, but what are some other differences as far as expanding these goals and focusing the spotlight on some other areas that maybe didn't receive some attention over the past 15 years?
One would first have to consider that, I mean, I said just now that the Millennium Development Goals were developed by a group of experts and then were implemented, were rolled out in a sense by the multilateral system, by the UN Development Program, by the development banks. This time around, already 2 years ago, member states started discussing and wanted to be involved in this themselves. So the result is something much more universal. If the Millennium Development Goals, and in a simplified way, were a plan to fix the most urgent problems in the South or in developing countries, then one could say that these sustainable development goals, this new set of goals that you just referred to, would be a kind of shared vision of humanity for 2030. So something much more universal, something that applies to all countries, something that takes every country to the task, something where every country would have to, let's say, tick off these 17 goals and 169 boxes or targets in 15 years' time. Allowing them a certain leeway, a certain flexibility in terms of what to do first and how to do it, but nevertheless attempting to achieve these goals within those 15 years. Another big difference is that these goals are rooted in a stronger way, I would say, in the human rights. And therefore, there is in the formulation of the goals, every time it's written that all should have access to water, all should have access to education, etc. So they are much more absolute in their formulation. Now, that may seem to be semantic, but it isn't. What that actually means is that you can no longer hide behind an average. You have to make sure that no one is left behind. And you can actually, you cannot really consider them to be achieved unless they are achieved for all. This is a very important difference to the Millennium Development Goals, where basically the idea was to go for low-hanging fruits, for activities that would give a quick impact, that would make a change. Strategically, it makes a lot of sense. But when you ask the international community to come up with its vision, they will not go for a minimalist vision. They will go for an absolute, for maximalist vision. And this is what we have. And this ambition, we have to make use of it now. We have to build on it, and we have to use that energy to set in motion an implementation that will get us further than the Millennium Development Goals did.
Mm-hmm. It sounds as though there's going to be closer scrutiny paid to actually accomplishing these goals and these targets, as opposed to the 8 original Millennium Development Goals that you're going to be scrutinizing the countries and asking them to show how they're accomplishing them or not accomplishing them, whatever the case might be. But will there be a closer scrutiny in the future?
Well, as I said, this new agenda is based on many lessons learned from the previous, from the Millennium, the implementation of the Millennium Development Goals. And there certainly are a number of lessons learned in terms of the review and the monitoring. And everyone knows that if you don't measure, if you don't monitor, if you don't review the implementation, you may not actually achieve them. Now, on the other hand, we know that countries are, of course, sovereign, and that they don't like to be monitored by other countries, and that it's always a bit complicated at an international level to monitor what individual countries are doing. Remember, this is a universal agenda. It's not about the countries in the north or the industrialized countries monitoring what the countries in the south or the developing countries would be doing. It's an agenda where every country would be responsible for implementation and for being reviewed and for being monitored in that case. So the word monitoring, the word accountability is a very sensitive one here in the UN. And so for the moment we are using the word review. We will review how it is done. Now, if we want a real implementation to take place, it will depend very much on heads of state and heads of government coming together here in September this year, and instead of agreeing with each other on an outcome, actually making a commitment to their own people back home. If that happens, then a natural accountability happens. It's not an accountability of one country versus another, although that to some extent also exists in a multilateral system, but an accountability of duty bearers towards rights holders, of elected people towards their constituencies. And there, I think everyone accepts that there needs to be accountability.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is an independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. If you would like to recommend future speakers or comment on previous programs, please go to www.globalconnectionstelevision.com. Today we're looking at the current Millennium Development Goals and future Sustainable Development Goals, and my guest is an expert on both of these topics. My guest today is Mr. Thomas Gass. Mr. Thomas Gass is the Assistant Secretary General of DESA, the Department of Economic and Social Affairs. We're talking about the new Sustainable Development Goals will come online January 1st, 2016. And there's been a considerable discussion. I've heard both ways. Some people are really excited about them, and they say this gives everybody an opportunity to focus on something. Other people say, well, maybe this is a little bit too large, too ambitious, 17 goals and 169 targets. How do you perceive both of those differing opinions? Do you feel it's the right amount and it gives everybody an opportunity to focus on the issues that are important to them, say a Rotary Club or a faith-based group or something like that?
Well, it's a good question. I'm a development cooperation person. I grew up with log frames in my mind. I was told if you have a strategy with more than 3 outcomes, you're all over the place. You're confused. Yeah. And so obviously, when I see 17 goals and 169 targets, I wonder. But I've realized something in this close interaction with this process. This is the first time that these members of the United Nations come together and develop their own joint vision for humanity in 2030. How can that be simple? I mean, humanity is diverse, is complex. The situations in different continents, in different countries. Take the small island development states, the landlocked countries. You have emerging economies. You have countries that have chronic humanitarian situations. How can these priorities be summed up in three outcomes? And so, while there is a part of me that kind of technical development cooperation professional side of me that regrets that this is not more streamlined, there is also the part of me that respects and honors this multilateral system in its diversity, that thinks, yes, we need to wrap our minds around the complexity of this world, and therefore see the value and the interest of having such a complex agenda and these 17 goals. And I mean, I would defy anyone to say which ones are not necessary. They actually are covering very important topics.
Excellent point. That's very, very true. They are. And of course, our viewers can go to www.desa.org to get more information, or they can Google Sustainable Development Goals, Millennium Development Goals, whatever they would like. Now, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has been very involved in this, hands-on. He released a report, a synthesis report called The Road to Dignity by 2030 for the next 15 years. Let's go briefly through the 6 main points to show how these points tie right into these goals. The first one is dignity. What did he mean by that?
Maybe I should first say, I mean, in this report, the Secretary General endorses very strongly the set of goals and targets, and actually commends the governments for coming up with this. And then, of course, acknowledging that communication of such a complex set of goals and targets can be difficult, he proposes 6 essential elements. Now, the first one, you said that dignity.
Yes.
Dignity is all about reducing poverty. This agenda is about eradicating extreme poverty in 2030. Before we were talking about halving poverty, now we are talking about eradicating extreme poverty, but also dealing with a very important element which has become a new theme in the last few years, and that is inequality. So dealing with dignity, promoting dignity, is about eradicating extreme poverty, reducing poverty, fighting inequality.
And element number 2 ties right into prosperity. What would you like to see with that?
Prosperity is the idea that all this can only be achieved, all these goals and targets can only be achieved in a context of growing economies, but not just growing anyhow. Economies that grow in a transformative, positive, and inclusive way. Economies in which the masses of the population can participate, and the profits and the benefits don't accrue only to the elite.
And the third element is justice.
Justice is also a new element of this agenda if you compare to the Millennium Development Goals. It's the idea that you need a safe, a secure environment. You need peaceful societies, and you need good institutions and good governance in institutions. This is mostly covered by Goal 16, though the idea of these 6 essential elements is not actually to basket the goals. They are supposed to cover them as a whole.
And the next element is the epicenter of all of this, people. What did he have in mind with people?
People is finishing the unfinished agenda of the Millennium Development Goals, is to make sure that people are healthier and can enjoy their lives, that education is improved, that girls and women, children are included into the economy, and are empowered. So these are the elements around people.
And the excuse me, the 5th, still trying to battle a cold. The 5th element is planet, I believe. What did he want to focus upon with planet?
The remember, these are the sustainable development goals. So it's all about integrating environment, economy, and social dimensions. And so the planet, the essential element planet, is all about preserving the ecosystem for all societies. So it's not just for industrialized countries or for some, but for all societies, and also, very importantly, for future generations. So the idea is to look further than just what our own needs are of this generation, but to make sure we have something that we can hand on to our children and our grandchildren.
Mm-hmm. And the sixth element is partnerships.
Partnership really underpins the whole agenda. And we are acutely aware that means of implementation will have to be put forward, that funds will have to be unlocked from wherever they are. I mean, not just public financing, also private financing, but also access to technology, access to medicine, involvement of the private sector in terms not just of their philanthropy, but also in terms of how they make their money. The function of the private sector in creating jobs and in maintaining decent and productive jobs is probably the single most important factor that has an impact on the majority of the lives on this planet. So this getting the private sector to be involved, and we have some wonderful partners here in the UN through the UN Global Compact and others, is an important part of this agenda. So partnerships.
Exactly. The UN Global Compact, as I recall, has about 8,000 to 9,000 corporations, businesses that are members of this, that are working on these issues that you're talking about today, on many of these, which is absolutely critical. You mentioned earlier about inequality, and that is so important. We have been reading so much about, it used to be, we always say, look at Latin America, because the chasm between the haves and the have-nots is so large in Latin America, but now we're saying it in other countries. The United States has one of the biggest chasms of any country in the world. How important is this for us to focus on this and to look at not having income redistribution per se, but to make that chasm smaller so that you have a thriving middle class, you have people in the lower middle or lower socioeconomic, or in the lower socioeconomic level that can be raised to the middle class, and to work on that, because that would deal with so many issues such as poverty, health problems, could even tie into climate change. It permeates, cuts across all of the issues, but how important is it to focus on that inequality?
It's a theme that has come very strongly, and I see it in a very positive light, because it actually brings together member states around these tables, these negotiating tables in the UN. Frequently the economic issues have been very divisive, and you had on the one side you have industrialized countries that would be rather conservative, and on the other hand you have countries that would feel that they should receive from the international solidarity. Now, when the subject of inequality comes on the table, it's a bit confusing, because every country has to look at itself, at how it has managed this problem, and so countries, strong emerging economies, just like Brazil, for example, have come and said, we have a problem. We have to deal with inequality. And that is very helpful, because that releases some honesty and some ambition also, and has placed this theme of fighting inequality as a strong transversal theme in this post-2015 agenda. It so happens that last year Thomas Piketty published his book, The Capital in the 21st Century, which deals with this subject and provides new data to it, and actually shows, what the impacts of this inequality might be and how it might evolve over time. And so it's a very current subject, and hopefully a subject that will help to universalize this post-2015 agenda.
And in the last 30 seconds we have, what message would you have to encourage people to learn more about the Sustainable Development Goals and to get involved in helping to achieve them?
Well, I'd like to say we all need to get on the starting line. by September of 2015. We have to get there. This agenda is not going to be a very symmetrically rolled out agenda. Everyone has to grab on the target and on the goal that they can do with their institution, with their organization, and do it. Because that's what we will. It will cause some chaos, but it doesn't matter. We need chaos here. We need movement. We need energy moving forward. And so I'm hoping that everyone out there, with their organization, individually, grabs this agenda and makes it their own, and holds their own leaders accountable for implementing it.
Mm-hmm. Well, Assistant Secretary General Thomas Gass with DESA, you certainly touched upon these major problems, and these are issues that affect all of us on planet Earth, and we all need to be involved because we can make a difference. We can help create this better world if we really focus on these and apply ourselves. But I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us on today's Global Connections program.